Hello, welcome to Deadliest Disasters, where we cover some of the most devastating events that happened throughout history. Today we're going to examine what remains the deadliest accident in aviation history, the Tenerife Airport disaster. On March 27, 1977, two Boeing 747 jumbo jets collided on a foggy runway on the small Spanish island of Tenerife, claiming 583 lives. Despite occurring over 4 decades ago, this tragic event continues to shape aviation safety protocols worldwide and provides critical lessons that extend far beyond the airline industry. To understand what happened that fateful day, we need to start with a seemingly unrelated event. Earlier on March 27th, a small bomb exploded at Gran Canaria Airport in Las Palmas, planted by Canary Islands separatists. The separatist group was called the Movement for the Self-Determination and Independence of the Canary Archipelago, and was the Canarian nationalist and socialist organization founded in 1964 by Antonio Cubillo, whose objective was the secession of the Canary Islands from Spain. This terrorist group planted bombs in malls, department stores, hotels, tourist offices, and more. The explosion at Gran Canaria Airport caused minor injuries, and a second bomb threat prompted authorities to close the airport temporarily. This closure set in motion a chain of events that would lead to disaster. Numerous flights bound for Gran Canaria were diverted to Los Rodeos Airport, now known as Tenerife North Airport, on the nearby island of Tenerife. Among these diverted aircraft were two Boeing 747s, KLM Flight 4805 and Pan Am Flight 1736. Los Rodeos was a small regional airport not designed to handle the sudden influx of large aircraft. The airport had only one runway and one main taxiway. As diverted planes continued to arrive, the small apron area became congested, forcing air traffic controllers to park aircraft on the main taxiway. Adding to these complications, a dense fog began rolling in from the nearby mountains, a weather phenomenon common to this airport, but particularly problematic on this crowded day. Visibility would soon drop to just 300 meters. Let's take a moment to understand the two flights involved. KLM Flight 4805 was a charter flight carrying 248 people, mostly Dutch tourists headed for a vacation in the Canary Islands. At the controls was Captain Jacob van Zanten, KLM's chief flight instructor and one of their most experienced pilots. His face was even featured in KLM's magazine's advertisements. Alongside him were First Officer Klaas Muurs and Flight Engineer Willem Schroeder. Pan Am Flight 1736 was carrying 396 passengers and crew, many of whom were American tourists planning to connect to a cruise. Captain Victor Grubbs was in command with First Officer Robert Bragg and Flight Engineer George Warnes completing the cockpit crew. Both aircraft were Boeing 747s, the largest passenger aircraft of their time, stretching nearly 230 feet long with wingspans of 196 feet. These massive machines were relatively new technology in 1977, having entered service just 8 years earlier. When Gran Canaria Airport reopened around 2 p.m., all diverted aircraft prepared to depart Tenerife. Due to the taxiway being blocked by parked planes, both the KLM and Pan Am jumbo jets had to taxi on the active runway itself. The KLM aircraft taxied first, traveling the entire length of the runway, followed by the Pan Am aircraft. When the KLM 747 reached the end, it needed to make a 180-degree turn to position itself for takeoff. The Pan Am flight was instructed to follow but exit the runway at the third taxiway intersection and wait. By now, the fog had thickened dramatically. The control tower could not see the aircraft and the aircraft could not see each other. Everything depended on radio communication and precise adherence to instructions. At approximately 5:06 p.m. local time, after completing its turn, the KLM crew was instructed to stand by for takeoff and to report when ready. Captain Van Zanten responded that they were ready and was told to hold position. The controller gave them their clearance instructions. This was not a takeoff clearance, but instead routing instructions to follow after takeoff. This is where the critical misunderstanding occurred. After receiving these instructions, the KLM captain said, "We are now at takeoff," and began accelerating down the runway. The first officer and flight engineer seemed momentarily uncertain, but did not strongly challenge the captain's decisions. Meanwhile, the Pan Am flight was still on the runway, trying to find the correct taxiway to exit in the thick fog. The air traffic controller and the Pan Am crew both realized the dangerous situation developing and transmitted warnings, but their messages overlapped, creating a static interference noise that rendered both transmissions unintelligible to the KLM crew. In the dense fog, neither crew could see the other aircraft until it was too late. The KLM plane was traveling at approximately 160 miles per hour when its pilots finally spotted the Pan Am 747 still on the runway. Despite attempting to climb, the KLM jet could not gain enough altitude, and its undercarriage and engines struck the upper fuselage of the Pan Am aircraft. The collision was catastrophic. The KLM aircraft stalled, rolled, and crashed approximately 500 feet beyond the point of impact, killing all 248 people on board instantly. The Pan Am aircraft's upper fuselage was torn open and the aircraft erupted into flames, but some passengers and crew managed to escape from the less damaged left side of the aircraft. Unfortunately, 335 of the 396 people aboard the Pan Am flight perished in this collision. In total, 583 lives were lost, making it the deadliest accident in aviation history, a tragic record it still holds today. The investigation revealed a complex web of factors that contributed to the disaster. At its core were several critical communication failures. First, the use of non-standard phraseology created ambiguity. Captain Van Zanten's statements, "We are now at takeoff," was not standard aviation terminology. The correct phrase would have been, "We are taking off," which might have triggered an immediate intervention from the tower. Similarly, the tower's response of "okay" may have been interpreted as a takeoff clearance. Second, simultaneous radio transmissions blocked crucial warnings. When both the control tower and Pan Am crew tried to warn the KLM aircraft, their transmissions overlapped, creating radio interference that prevented either message from being heard. Third, there was a significant language barrier. English was not the native language of either the Spanish air traffic controllers or the Dutch KLM crew, leading to subtle but critical misunderstandings. The psychological concept of authority gradient also played a crucial role. Captain Van Zanten was not just any pilot. He was KLM's chief flight instructor, a man who trained other KLM pilots, including his own first officer. When he began the takeoff role, his first officer and flight engineer expressed mild concern, but didn't forcefully challenge his actions. The hierarchical cockpit culture of the time made it difficult for subordinate crew members to question a captain's decisions. Time pressure likely influenced decision-making as well. The KLM crew was approaching their maximum allowed duty hours, and if delayed further, they would face an overnight stay and significantly inconvenience their passengers. This may have created a subtle but powerful incentive to depart quickly. And finally, the unusual situation of an overcrowded small airport combined with rapidly deteriorating weather conditions created an environment where errors were more likely to occur and less likely to be caught. In the aftermath, a multinational investigation team was assembled, including representatives from Spain, where the accident occurred, the Netherlands, which is KLM Airlines' home country, and the United States, which is Pan Am Airlines' home country and where Boeing was based. Investigators had the crucial advantage of cockpit voice recorders and flight data recorders from both aircraft, allowing them to reconstruct the exact sequence of communications and events. The Spanish authorities who led the investigation placed primary blame on the KLM captain for taking off without clearance. They also cited the ambiguous radio communications and the deteriorating weather conditions as contributing factors. The Dutch investigators, while acknowledging their pilot's error, emphasized the contribution of the confusing airport layout, poor ground radar, and communication problems. The American investigators generally aligned with the Spanish findings, but placed additional emphasis on the communications issues. These different perspectives reflected not just technical disagreements, but the natural human tendency to defend one's own nationals and systems, a challenge that continues to affect international accident investigations to this day. Behind the technical details and investigative findings lies the immeasurable human cost of this tragedy. The 583 victims came from over a dozen countries, though the majority were Dutch and American. Most of the KLM passengers were traveling for vacation, with many couples and families aboard. One Dutch family lost 23 of their family members in this disaster. Among the Pan Am passengers were many retirees looking forward to a cruise, college students on spring break, and a group of Venezuelan parents traveling to meet their children studying in the United States. For the 61 people who survived the Pan Am crash, the experience was harrowing. Most escaped through a few usable exits on the aircraft's left side. Many helped others escape, showing remarkable courage in the terrifying situation. Survivors described crawling through thick smoke and jumping from the wreckage, only to find themselves in dense fog, disoriented and unsure which way to run as explosions continued behind them. The disaster's impact extended far beyond those directly involved. Thousands of family members and friends lost loved ones. First responders and investigators dealt with the trauma of the aftermath. The aviation community as a whole was deeply shaken by the scale of the tragedy. If there is any silver lining to such a terrible tragedy, it's in the profound changes to aviation safety that followed. The Tenerife disaster catalyzed the development of crew resource management, known as CRM. It is a set of training procedures and protocols designed to improve communication between all crew members and break down the rigid authority structures that had prevented junior officers from effectively challenging a captain's decisions. Standard phraseology in aviation communication was reinforced and expanded, with specific terms established for critical moments like takeoff clearance. The rule became explicit. No aircraft begins takeoff unless the words, "cleared for takeoff," are heard and acknowledged. Better ground radar systems were developed and implemented at airports worldwide, allowing controllers to monitor aircraft movements even in low visibility conditions. The concept of threat and error management emerged, training pilots to recognize situations with elevated risk and to maintain heightened vigilance in such circumstances. And perhaps most importantly, a culture of safety that emphasized teamwork over individual authority began to take root access across the industry. However, just 3 years later, another deadly accident had occurred in Tenerife. Dan Air Flight 1008 was a fatal accident involving a Boeing 727 en route from Manchester to Tenerife. The accident occurred on the 25th of April, 1980 in a forest on Tenerife's Mount La Esperanza. The aircraft's flight deck crew wrongly executed an unpublished holding pattern in an area of very high ground. It resulted in the aircraft crashing into the side of the mountain, killing all 146 on board. In the Mesa Mota area near the airport, a monument designed by Dutch sculptor Rudy van der Wint features a spiral staircase that appears to climb endlessly towards the sky. Every March 27th, the memorial services are held to honor those who lost their lives. In pilot training programs around the world, the Tenerife disaster is studied in detail. Cockpit recordings, though difficult to listen to, are used to demonstrate how easily critical errors can develop and how important clear communication and teamwork are in preventing them. The safety culture changes sparked by Tenerife have spread beyond aviation to other high-risk fields including healthcare, nuclear power operations, and military operations. The concept of flattened authority gradients, standardized communication, and systematic error prevention have saved countless lives across multiple industries. The Tenerife Airport disaster stands as a powerful reminder of how a series of individually manageable problems can combine to create a catastrophic outcome. No single factor caused this tragedy. Not one person's mistake, not the weather, not the airport congestion. It was the intersection of all these elements that led to disaster. This understanding has fundamentally changed how we approach safety in complex systems. We now recognize that safety isn't achieved merely by preventing individual errors, but by creating systems resilient enough to catch and contain those errors before they cascade into tragedy. In the decades since Tenerife, commercial aviation has become incredibly safe, statistically the safest form of transportation available. The lessons purchased at such a terrible cost on that foggy runway have protected millions of travelers in the years since. As we remember the 583 lives lost, we also acknowledge the profound legacy they left behind. A transformation in how humans work together in complex, high-risk environments, and a commitment to ensuring such a disaster never happens again.
Thanks for watching today's video on this devastating but important historical event. If you found this informative, please hit that like button and subscribe for more historical deep dives. And let me know in the comments what other overlooked historical events you'd like to learn about. Until next time, this has been Deadliest Disasters.